The 1970s produced some of the most memorable songs ever recorded, and a surprising number of them came from artists who never came close to repeating that success. One perfect moment, one song that stuck, and then nothing. Here's the best one-hit wonder of each year in the 1970s. 1970, In the Summertime by Mungo Jerry.
In the summertime, when the weather is high, you can stretch right up and...
In the early summer of 1970, a skiffle-influenced jug band from England released a song that became one of the fastest-selling singles in British history. Mungo Jerry were barely a band in the conventional sense. Their lineup shifted constantly, and their sound owed more to 1920s American jug band music than to anything on the contemporary British charts. In the Summertime sold 1 million copies in the UK in its first week of release, a figure that had never been achieved before. It went to number 1 in the UK and reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States. Worldwide sales eventually exceeded 30 million copies, making it one of the best-selling singles of all time.
We're always happy, last we're living, yeah, that's our philosophy.
The man behind it was Ray Dorset, who wrote the song in about 15 minutes. Dorset has said in interviews that he woke up one morning with the melody fully formed in his head, sat down, and had the whole thing finished before breakfast. The recording was made at a cost that Dorset later described as almost nothing, using homemade percussion and a deliberately loose, unhurried arrangement that gave the finished record a quality closer to a backyard party than a studio session. The band first performed the song at the 1970 Hollywood Music Festival in Staffordshire, where they were an unknown act playing to a crowd that had come for bigger names. The response was immediate enough that Pi Records fast-tracked the single's release. There was no follow-up that came close. Mungo Jerry continued recording for years, but nothing they released after 1970 left a mark on the mainstream charts. In the Summertime remained the beginning, middle, and end of their commercial story. A record so perfectly suited to its season that it still appears every summer, 50 years on, as though it never really left. Ray Dorset has continued performing the song live well into the 2020s, and the audiences who come to hear it still know every word. Some songs earn that kind of permanence through decades of critical reassessment. This one earned it in 15 minutes on a morning when nobody was expecting anything at all.
Have a drink, have a drive, go out and see what you can find.
1971, Joy to the World by Three Dog Night. Three Dog Night had been a working band since 1967, built around 3 lead vocalists, Danny Hutton, Corey Wells, and Chuck Negron, rotating on the same material. They were unusual for the era in that they recorded almost exclusively songs written by other people, which gave them access to a wider range of material than most of their contemporaries. Between 1969 and 1974, they placed 21 songs on the Billboard Hot 100, 12 of which reached the top 10. By any measure, they were not a one-hit wonder in the conventional sense. But Joy to the World stands apart from everything else they did. It was written by Hoyt Axton, a country singer-songwriter who had also written The Pusher and Greenback Dollar. Axton had originally written it as a children's song, or something close to one, a simple, exuberant, slightly absurdist piece that he performed almost as a throwaway. When Three Dog Night heard it, they recorded it with a gospel-influenced arrangement that turned what had been a quirky novelty into something that felt genuinely euphoric. Released in February 1971, it went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 6 weeks. It became the best-selling single of 1971 in the United States, outselling everything else that year, and remains the only Three Dog Night recording that most people outside of dedicated fans of the band can identify on the spot. Their other hits have drifted from common memory, but Joy to the World has never left. It has been used in commercials, sampled in hip-hop recordings, and covered hundreds of times. Axton reportedly received more in royalties from that recording than from anything else he wrote across his entire career. The song he tossed off as a children's novelty outlasted everything around it. 1972, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl by Looking Glass. Looking Glass spent years playing club dates along the American East Coast without making any real commercial impression. They were a New Jersey rock band, competent and hardworking, with no particular reason to expect what happened next. Brandy was written by the band's lead singer Elliot Lurie and tells the story of a barmaid in a harbor town who loves a sailor who has chosen the sea over her. It has the structure of a short story more than a conventional pop song. A specific character, a specific place, a specific and melancholy resolution. The woman in the song stays. The sailor leaves. That's the whole of it, and somehow it's enough. When the record was released in the spring of 1972 on Epic Records, radio picked it up slowly and then all at once. By August 1972, it had reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it spent 1 week. It was the only week the band would ever spend at the top of any chart. Looking Glass released a follow-up that year and another the following year. Neither made an impression. By 1974, they had broken up. Lurie went on to work as a film director and producer, moving largely away from music. The song spent the next 4 decades doing what certain songs do, turning up in films, in television soundtracks, in the background of scenes set in the early 1970s, and introducing itself to new audiences who had never heard of Looking Glass and didn't need to. In 2014, it appeared in Guardians of the Galaxy as part of the film's Awesome Mix Volume 1, and digital sales spiked immediately. A song from 1972 about a sailor's girl became, briefly, one of the most downloaded tracks of 2014. 1973, Midnight Train to Georgia by Gladys Knight and the Pips. This one requires a small asterisk on the one-hit wonder label, because Gladys Knight and the Pips were not one-hit wonders in any conventional sense. They had been recording since the early 1960s and had several charting singles before this one, including I Heard It Through the Grapevine in 1967, which actually predated Marvin Gaye's more famous version. But Midnight Train to Georgia was their only #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100, their only Grammy Award winner, and the only recording that placed them permanently in the conversation about the greatest performances of the decade. The song was written by Jim Weatherly, originally under the title Midnight Plane to Houston, loosely inspired by a phone conversation he had with actress Farrah Fawcett about her plans to move home to Texas. Cissy Houston recorded an early version. By the time Gladys Knight heard it, the title had been changed to Georgia at the suggestion of producer Sonny Limbo, partly for the rhythm, partly because Georgia felt more southern and soulful than Houston. Knight and the Pips recorded it at Muscle Shoals Sound Studios in Alabama in early 1973. It was released in August and reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 by October, staying there for 2 weeks. Knight won the Grammy Award for Best Rhythm and Blues Vocal Performance Female. The Pips won Best Rhythm and Blues Vocal Performance by a duo, group, or chorus for the same recording. The first time separate Grammys were awarded to a lead singer and her backing group for the same track. The song has never really left. It has been covered by dozens of artists, licensed for films and television, more times than anyone has bothered to count, and used in commercials, sports broadcasts, and award show tributes across 5 decades. Knight herself has said in interviews that she still feels the song every time she performs it, that something about the lyric, the choice the narrator makes, never becomes routine. It remains one of the most emotionally complete performances in the Soul catalog, built around a story about choosing love over ambition that has aged without losing any of its weight. 1974, The Streak by Ray Stevens. Ray Stevens had been recording since the early 1960s and had modest chart success with comedic novelty records and the occasional straight pop song. His 1969 recording Gitterzan had reached the top 10, and Everything is Beautiful in 1970 won him a Grammy. He was a known quantity in Nashville, regarded as a craftsman who understood comedy and pop in equal measure. The streak arrived in 1974, timed almost perfectly to an actual cultural phenomenon. Streaking, the practice of running naked through public spaces, had become briefly fashionable on American college campuses and had been appearing in news broadcasts with enough regularity to qualify as a genuine trend. Stevens wrote the song as a comic monologue, narrated by a man trying to describe the chaos of a streaking incident to a news reporter while keeping his wife, Ethel, out of trouble. It was released in March 1974 and reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, spending 3 weeks at the top. It was also #1 in the United Kingdom and Australia and sold over 5 million copies worldwide. Stevens performed it at the Academy Awards ceremony that year, one of the stranger choices in the show's history, appearing on one of the most watched television broadcasts in America to perform a song about naked people running in public. The record moved quickly enough that Stevens earned a gold certification within weeks of release. The streaking craze faded within months, and the song faded with it, which is precisely what novelty records do. Stevens had other chart entries across his career, but nothing that came close to the commercial footprint of The Streak. It remains a time capsule of a very specific and very brief moment, built on a fad that was over before the summer of 1974 had ended, and perfectly representative of the kind of song that can only become a massive hit when absolutely nothing about it is designed to last.
Oh, yes, they call him the streak.
1975, Fly, Robin, Fly by Silver Convention. Silver Convention were a West German disco act assembled by producers Michael Kunze and Sylvester LeVay. The group had no fixed lineup in its early days. It was essentially a studio project built around whoever was available for a given session. Fly, Robin, Fly was recorded in Munich in 1975 and contained, in its entirety, 6 words of lyric. The song ran for just under 3.5 minutes, and those 6 words, the title phrase repeated 3 times followed by the instruction to go up, up to the sky, constituted the complete lyrical content. It was released in 1975 and reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, spending 3 weeks at the top. At the 1977 Grammy Awards, it won Best Rhythm and Blues Vocal Performance by a Duo, Group, or Chorus, a remarkable recognition for a recording that contained fewer words than most song titles. The win surprised many in the American music industry, who were still adjusting to the fact that some of the most commercially successful disco records of the era were being produced not in New York or Philadelphia, but in Munich.
Fly, Robin, fly.
Silver Convention had a follow-up in 1976 with Get Up and Boogie, which reached #2 in the United States, making them technically not a pure one-hit wonder by chart standards. But Fly, Robin, Fly was the recording that defined them, the one that won the Grammy, and the one that anyone over 50 will recognize from the first 4 bars. It also helped establish Munich as a center of European disco production at a moment when the genre was still finding its commercial footing. 1976, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover by Paul Simon.
There must be 50 ways to leave your lover.
Another asterisk is required here. Paul Simon is obviously not a one-hit wonder. He had been one half of Simon and Garfunkel, one of the most successful musical partnerships in American pop history, and had released several acclaimed and commercially successful solo albums before this song arrived. But 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover was his only #1 single on the Billboard Hot 100 as a solo artist, and that fact alone earns it a place in this list.
There must be 50 ways to leave your lover.
The song appeared on his 1975 album, Still Crazy, after all these years, which won the Grammy Award for Album of the Year. The single was released in January 1976 and spent 3 weeks at #1. It was built around a drum pattern played by session drummer Steve Gadd that Simon has said he wrote the entire song around. The words came second, constructed to fit a rhythm that Gadd played almost off the cuff during a session at A&R Studios in New York. The result was something that felt completely casual and was completely precise. The rhyme scheme, pairing names with rhyming exit strategies, gave the song a playfulness that disguised how carefully constructed it was. The backing band on the recording included some of the most respected session musicians working in New York at the time, including Gadd on drums, Tony Levin on bass, and Hugh McCracken on guitar. Simon has described the process of writing the song as one of the more effortless experiences of his career. Once Gadd had established the rhythm, the rest fell into place quickly. Simon has described the song as being about the difficulty of ending relationships while also being structurally a joke. That combination of lightness and precision is what has kept it in rotation for 50 years. The song was certified platinum by the RIAA and has appeared in films, commercials, and television programs so frequently that it has become one of those recordings that most people know without necessarily being able to name the album it came from. It remains his commercial peak as a solo act, which is a strange thing to say about someone of his stature, but the chart tells the story it tells.
There must be 50 ways to leave your lover.
1977, Don't Give Up on Us by David Soul.
Don't give up on us, baby.
David Soul was an American actor who had become one of the most recognizable faces on television through his role as Detective Ken Hutchinson in the police drama Starsky and Hutch, which premiered in 1975 and ran through 1979. The show was one of the highest-rated programs on American television during its peak years, and Soul's face was on magazine covers on both sides of the Atlantic. In 1976, riding that wave of visibility, Soul released Don't Give Up on Us as a single in the United Kingdom, and the response was immediate.
Painted on the stars, we can change our...
The song was written by Tony Macaulay, one of the most prolific British pop songwriters of the era, responsible for hits including Build Me Up Buttercup and Baby, Now That I've Found You. It was a mid-tempo ballad constructed around a straightforward emotional appeal, and Soul's delivery, warm, earnest, and benefiting from his existing television profile, connected with audiences in a way that pure pop recordings by unknown artists rarely do. Macaulay had a specific instinct for matching a song's emotional register to the person delivering it, and in Soul he found a vehicle that gave the lyric an extra dimension of sincerity.
Don't give up on us, baby. Lord, no.
Don't Give Up on Us went to number 1 in the United Kingdom in January 1977, spending 4 weeks at the top. When it was released in the United States, it went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making Soul one of a small number of actors to top the pop charts on both sides of the Atlantic in the same year. The follow-up, Silver Lady, also went to number 1 in the UK later that year, though it peaked lower in the United States. Soul's music career faded as Starsky and Hutch concluded, and he returned primarily to acting. He died in January of 2024. Don't Give Up on Us remains the clearest example of television fame translating directly into chart success during the 1970s, a song that almost certainly needed the face behind it to become what it became.
We can still come through.
1978, Le Freak by Chic. Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards formed Chic in New York City in 1976, and by 1978 they had built themselves into one of the tightest rhythm sections in the disco world. The story of how Le Freak came to be written has become one of the more entertaining origin stories in pop history. On New Year's Eve 1977, Rodgers and Edwards had been invited to Studio 54, the most famous nightclub in the world at that moment, as guests of Grace Jones. When they arrived, the doorman turned them away. They were left standing on the sidewalk outside the most exclusive party in New York City. They went back to Rodgers' apartment, picked up their instruments, and vented their frustration in the form of a song. The original chorus, by Rodgers' own account, was considerably less polite than the version eventually released. Atlantic Records asked them to clean it up. They did. Le Freak was released in September of 1978 and became the best-selling single in Atlantic Records history up to that point, selling over 7 million copies. It spent 6 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and went to number 1 in multiple other countries. The song's opening guitar riff, played by Rodgers himself, became one of the most sampled in hip-hop history over the following decades, appearing in recordings by artists who were not yet born when the original was released. Chic had other significant hits, Good Times in 1979 being the most important, its bass line later forming the foundation of Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. But Le Freak was the song that defined the band's commercial peak and became one of the defining recordings of the disco era. Nile Rodgers went on to become one of the most successful producers in music history, working with David Bowie, Madonna, Diana Ross, and Daft Punk among dozens of others. Bernard Edwards died in April 1996 while on tour in Japan with a reformed version of Chic. But the sidewalk outside Studio 54 on New Year's Eve 1977 is where the whole thing started. Rejection turning into one of the decade's biggest records before the night was over. 1979, My Sharona by The Knack. The Knack formed in Los Angeles in 1978, and within a year they had become one of the most talked about unsigned bands in the city. Capitol Records signed them after a bidding war involving multiple major labels, and the band went into the studio with producer Mike Chapman, who had recently worked with Blondie and Cheap Trick, with the intention of capturing their live energy on tape as directly as possible. Chapman insisted on recording the album quickly and with minimal overdubs, wanting the record to sound like a band playing in a room rather than a construction project. My Sharona was the result. It was recorded in a single day. The song was written by guitarist Burton Avere and lead singer Doug Fieger, who had become obsessed with a 17-year-old girl named Sharona Alperin, whom he had met in a record store. Fieger later described the song as a completely honest expression of the kind of irrational infatuation that made it impossible to think about anything else. Alperin and Fieger eventually dated for several years, and she later became a well-known Los Angeles real estate agent, a fact that has attached itself to the song's legacy in a way that Fieger probably never anticipated. The single was released in June 1979 and spent 6 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The Knack's debut album, Get the Knack, sold over 5 million copies and became the fastest-selling debut album in Capitol Records history, surpassing even the Beatles. The marketing around the album leaned heavily into Beatles comparisons. The black and white cover art echoed with the Beatles, and Capitol's promotional campaign made explicit claims about the band's potential significance. That comparison invited a backlash that a less hyped band might have avoided. The follow-up single, Good Girls Don't, reached #11. But the second album was a commercial disappointment, and the backlash against the band, which had been positioned as the saviors of rock and roll, a burden no band could comfortably carry, was swift and severe. A Nuke the Knack campaign emerged among certain music fans and critics who felt the hype had outpaced the substance. The Knack never returned to the top 10. Doug Fieger died in February 2010 after a long illness. My Sharona remains one of the most instantly recognizable opening riffs of the decade, the kind of song that fills a room the moment the first note plays. 45 years later and still completely unavoidable. 10 years, 10 songs, 10 artists who had exactly one moment at the top, or close enough to it that the distinction barely matters. Some of them built careers around that moment. Others disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. A few of them had been working for years before the moment came, and a few of them had barely started. What they share is something harder to define than a chart position. Each of these songs arrived in a specific year and sounded exactly like that year. Not like the year before it, not like the year after. That kind of specificity is part of what makes them feel like time capsules when you hear them now. The summer of In the Summertime, the winter of Don't Give Up on Us, the month when everyone was talking about streakers and Ray Stevens already had the record pressed. One-hit wonders get underestimated, maybe because the phrase itself carries a hint of failure, the suggestion that there should have been more, that one wasn't enough. But one song that 40 million people recognize 50 years later is not a small thing. Most artists spend entire careers trying to write something that lasts that long and never get close. These 10 managed it in one take, one afternoon, one session that nobody expected to amount to anything at all. If this took you back somewhere, hit like and subscribe. There's plenty more of this kind of thing coming.